For many, the American dream is just that. Here to talk about the challenges many face when it comes to home ownership, please welcome Amy Bohutinsky with Zillow Group.
This is my family. This is my grandmother, whom we called Mutti, and my dad. The year was around 1942, and they lived in Budapest, Hungary. By all measures, they lived a very comfortable life, but that life was about to change. World War II was raging in Europe, and soon Hungary would be occupied by Germany and then Russia. Fearing they'd be killed, my family fled on foot. My dad had a younger sister who died along the way. Eventually, though, they found their way to a safe place, and eventually World War II came to an end. And in 1949, when my dad was 9 years old, my family, my grandparents here, they immigrated to the United States. My grandfather spoke zero English, and the only job he could find was as a dishwasher in a hotel. But he took it, and he worked hard, and soon he took a second job so he could begin to save money. And within a decade, my family had saved up enough money to put a down payment on their first home. They soon saved up more and bought a second home, a duplex that they began to rent out, and then another duplex, and then a triplex. And soon, my grandparents were making a healthy living on the back of real estate, my grandfather as an investor and a landlord. They sent my dad to college. They were even able to buy a vacation home in the mountains that reminded them of Eastern Europe. I tell this story today because what my grandparents experienced and passed on to future generations, to me, was this idea of the American dream. This idea that anyone here can work hard, buy a home, build wealth through that home, and with that wealth creation, create opportunity for generations to come. This is why every single one of us do what we do. But the American dream and the story that my family experienced hasn't always been available to everyone. And to understand why, we have to first think about who's been left out. So today, 67% of US households are white, 13% are Hispanic, and 13% are black. But when we look at who owns homes today, there's a disparity. In homeownership, 76% of homeowners are white, but just 9% of Hispanics and 8% of blacks. Minorities are significantly underrepresented in homeownership, and one reason why goes back many decades. Around the time that my grandparents came to the United States was a time that we all know as the significant post-war boom in homeownership, the creation of suburbia and bedroom communities all around America. Levittown, New York, is one project that was seen as the model for suburbs. You had thousands of people, veterans and other Americans, who were able to get loans that were for construction that were guaranteed by the Federal Housing Administration. The problem, though, is that these loans were exclusively available to whites. Within a decade, Levittown went from a potato field to a bustling community of over 70,000 residents that did not have a single minority in town. Levittown isn't the only such example, though. This played out in thousands of communities at the time across the United States. And policies like this were then outlawed as part of the Fair Housing Act of 1968, but their legacy lived on. In fact, from 1934 to 1962, we had over $120 billion in loans that only went to 2% minorities. That legacy, while again it was stopped many families from passing the equity and wealth in their home on to future generations. And we can see that even in statistics today, many years later. Today, blacks bring home about 60% of the income of white families. But when you look at accumulated wealth, African American families have just 5% of the accumulated wealth. When people own homes, they save money, they accumulate wealth through that source of equity, and minorities for an entire generation missed out on this chance. But homeownership and who has access to it isn't just about race. Another more recent event impacts pretty significantly who are homeowners today, and that's the Great Recession of the last decade. So we're all familiar with this chart. This is what happened to home values from 2007 to 2011. They plunged, on average, 23% across the country. And the good news, as we know, is this graph has now gone up. In many places in the US, home prices have gone back to their pre-recession norms. But that doesn't ignore the fact that 10 million people lost their homes to foreclosure during this recession, and still today, we have 5 million people who are still underwater on a mortgage. These people have zero equity in their homes. And as a result, we've seen the homeownership rate change. On the eve of the recession, close to 70% of Americans owned a home. Today, that number has plunged down to 64%. This is a historic low for the last couple of decades. And as people who build our businesses off of others owning homes and encouraging other people to buy homes, this statistic should feel startling. How do we as an industry and as professionals impact this statistic? How do we convince more people to buy homes? How do we create a landscape where more people can be homeowners? To figure this out, we have to look at our next generation of homeowners, renters. And this group has some problems of their own. So historically, people in America have paid about a quarter of their income, 25% of their take-home income on rent. But over the last several years, rents have been growing at a pace that's outpacing incomes in so many places in the US. And today, people pay close to 30% of their take-home income on rent. In major cities, though, it's even higher. Look at Miami. People pay 41% of their take-home income on rent. San Francisco, Los Angeles, close to 50%. When people can barely afford the rent, they're not saving money. They're not thinking about being homeowners of the future. They're just trying to keep a roof over their heads. And what we have today with our renters then is a growing population of people who are what we call housing insecure. These are people who have jobs, but because the rent is not affordable for them, there may be just one paycheck, one car repair, one unexpected medical event away from losing their homes. Last year at Zillow Group, we conducted some pretty groundbreaking research looking at what just a couple percentages in a rent increase means on the homeless population. And we found that when the rent increases just 5% and is not matched by income increases, just a 5% rent increase means 3,000 people here in New York City become homeless. A 5% rent increase means that close to 2,000 in Los Angeles and hundreds in cities across the United States. When we think about homeownership, we often think about it as solving a problem for people who can afford homes. As an industry, we think about it as let's just convince more people to buy homes. I would posit, though, that the key to creating more homeownership is to think about homeownership as a long game. Think about how do we help those who can barely afford their rent, how do we help to get them in a stable place so that they can begin to save money and so that they can become the homeowners of the future. At Zillow Group, this is something we've been thinking about a lot over the past year as we've been examining what is our role in creating homeowners of the future. And we've decided where we can absolutely make the most impact is to play the long game. And last year, we launched something called the Home Project. The Home Project was our first national social impact and advocacy program where we're giving $5 million over the coming 5 years to address housing insecurity. And we're doing it in a couple of ways. First, with our people. We have over 3,200 employees in 9 cities across the US. How do we mobilize our people to spend countless hours addressing housing insecurity in the areas where we do business? Also, our products with Zillow and Trulia, StreetEasy, HotPads, we have the platform where most people shop for homes, for sale and for rent across the US. How do we make these products more useful for people looking for affordable housing? One example of this is something we launched called Community Pillar, where we made it easier for renters to find landlords who may be willing to rent to people with less than perfect credit or less than the ideal down payment. And we're thinking and having hack weeks and building more in this area. And the third focus is our platform. We're an $8 billion public company. We have 180 million people who use our products every month. We have a voice. And how do we use that voice on a national advocacy level in Washington, in the communities where we do business, with academics, with economists, to better understand the problem and come up with real solutions so that we can address housing insecurity and create homeowners of the future? This is Zillow Group's program. This is where we're focusing. But there are things that every single person in this room can do every day to impact. And I want to give you some examples. First, volunteer your time. So the Weinberg Choi team is a brokerage team in Chicago. Last year, they spent 400 hours of their team's time volunteering for people who face housing insecurity in their neighborhood. And among that, they built 2 homes. Raise money. Doug Miller, a broker with John L. Scott in Port Orchard, Washington, every year he sponsors a 5K race and matches contributions for this race that specifically addresses needy families in his community. Last year, the race helped 4,000 families with housing instability. Use your knowledge to help educate people. Angelica Reyes is a RE/MAX agent in Reno, and she hosts home buying seminars where she partners with a lender, and they specifically target people who have lost their home to foreclosure in the past or people with less than perfect credit. To date, they have helped 90 of these families buy homes and find homeownership again. And when natural disaster strikes, when people lose their homes, volunteer. In a very high-profile example this year, we saw Keller Williams send thousands of associates and their families to Texas to help the victims of Hurricane Harvey. There are so many things that each of us individually can do to address homeownership as a long game, but as an industry, I think we can do so much more. Here's something we know. We know that Americans want to own homes. This is data we look at Zillow Group all the time. We do surveys, we ask people. People believe in the American dream. They want to own homes. The problem is so many of them can't. Yet, as an industry, on a national industry level, so many millions of dollars and hours of our advocacy is spent on the short term, trying to convince people you should own a home. These people want to own a home. Let's shift our advocacy to play the long game, to help and enable people so that they can become homeowners in the future, because I guarantee you that they want to do this. Over the coming year, we're going to be expanding the Home Project so that it's not just a platform for Zillow Group and our company and our employees, but so that it is a broader, powerful platform that this entire industry can be a part of, where we can focus on homeownership where it counts the most, playing the long game to help people find stability and find home in the future. Because our hope, and our hope with all of you if you join us, and you join us in our advocacy and the programs we lay out for you to help us, and you join us in coming up with ideas on how we can address this problem, our hope for the future is that we can create story after story that's just like my family's story, where people in America can realize the American dream, they can afford to buy a home, and they can create lives for their families for generations to come that are prosperous. I hope you'll join us. Thank you.